Okay, so welcome this morning to our GFM cost transfer and other hot topics. And with us this morning, we have Marie Baca, the Assistant Director for Grants and Funds Management. We have Tiffany Boyd, Senior Manager of Compliance. Lindsay Anastasio, our Assistant Controller. And then we also have Nita Reed-Williamson, Associate Director of Sponsored Awards Management. So this morning, I'm going to pass this over to Marie, and she's going to get us started. And then the other folks are going to jump in and provide some support and answer some questions all along the way. It's all yours, Marie.
All right. Good morning, everybody. We'll just jump right in. Today's agenda, we're going to go over the cost transfer policy. We have a small update, and we've also made a couple small changes to the retro form, some information about project team workflow, reporting, and then risk accounts, award setup, and also closeout as we prepare for year end. With that also then summer pay on grants, sub-award invoicing, and then some helpful hints and tips that we've compiled for everybody just to go over. So a brief reminder, we have a cost transfer policy. It's FINA 3.35 out on our website. We've had that for a couple years now. The purpose of that policy is to make sure that we follow uniform guidance as it relates to cost transfers and avoid as many audit findings as possible with proper accounting of expenses. The definition of a cost transfer is a reassignment or transfer of charges between accounts. This does include both direct charges and cost share. If you're adjusting either one of those, they fall under the cost transfer policy. The change that we are going to be making with the cost transfer policy starting April 15th is that any cost transfer that is requested, including retro funding changes, must have a cost transfer justification form. Essentially, this form replaces the free-form memos that have been included with transfers, with payroll, or you've seen us ask for memo details with expense module correction forms, any of those kinds of requests, JVs that you submit. This form has come about mostly to make sure that we have everything consistent. Every transfer has the exact same backup rather than something that's just a memo where it's difficult to know exactly what needs included. This also will require PI approval. It will ensure protection across all vested parties. It'll ensure that the PI is aware of the charges that are being adjusted either to and from their award. And it'll also ensure that at Central we have proper documentation to avoid an audit finding related to an otherwise valid transfer. Through our NSF audit, transfers have heavily been scrutinized, and the challenge is that some of those questions have gone back to transactions or transfers that occurred in 2016, 2015, and it's difficult for everybody, even if it was a valid transfer, to find and document a proper justification. So this form will hopefully alleviate that in the future, where the transfer will just include exactly what we need. A brief peek at the transfer form. It follows the same format that you would have with the memo. At the top, you'll mark what type of cost transfer you're completing, where you're moving it from and to, and then answer the three basic questions. Questions are exact same questions that we would ask with the 90-day memo, and then the PI approval at the bottom. This form, we're going to finalize a couple things, and then it will be out on the website before April 15th. You'll be able to look at it in detail. If you have any questions, you can reach out to myself or Lindsay, and we can walk you through any specific questions or concerns that you may have. Please note also that the 90-day limit is no longer in effect for a justification for cost transfers, though. So all cost transfers, all payroll retros, beginning April 15th will require this form to be included. That was also another lessons learned from the audit that we've recently gone through or that we're completing. All transfers required a justification, Now, under 90 days might have been less of a red flag and easier to substantiate. However, they still did ask for this type of information. So we just want to make sure that we're covered and that the university and our faculty are all protected and that the charges can still stand. And also, as we were working through the cost transfer justification form, we took a fresh look at the payroll retro funding change form. And some of the information at the top was repetitive or information that we can look for ourselves. So the new form will also be uploaded to the Controller's Office website, but at the top you will just need a USC ID and the first and last name of the individual. The justification field, if you are using this form to adjust anything with a project in our business unit, then you just need to put the cost transfer justification form as kind of part of that packet, and you will not need to complete that section. So you'll just be completing the justification or note section if you're using non-USCSP payroll. So kind of moving back to cost transfers that are allowable when we have proper documentation in the forms completed, the transfer should be moving an expense that provides a direct benefit to the project that it's moving to. It should also comply with both our policies and any sponsor's terms and conditions. And then obviously it has to be fully documented. So we need to be able to see where the original expense occurred and then where it needs to be moving to also. Sometimes we get cost transfer requests where it's requesting to move an expense that didn't actually post where it's being moved from. So it's important to be able to pinpoint the exact expense, where it's currently at and where it's moving to. So some common examples of transfers that we see, it's, correct errors of untimely information. So if you have a late notice of award, so you didn't set up a risk account, you may have charged your departmental account for an expense or supplies, and then the award gets set up for anything that's in period or sitting on an A&E fund, then you'd be able to transfer that on to the award. Then also to reallocate effort based on actual effort expended, to move pre-award costs if they are appropriate and they're approved and allowable with uniform guidance, then we see those come through also. To correctly allocate expenses, then we'll also have cost transfers to remove unallowable charges for sponsors' disallowed costs, or if we have out-of-period charges that posted, then we'd need to do a transfer to get those off of the project. Cost transfers that aren't allowable. This is a big one, to correct deficiencies caused by overruns or other funding considerations. That terminologies directly from uniform guidance, and sponsors watch this closely. They'll specifically ask what the funding state of the award was, where the charge is coming from. So they're looking to see, was the award overspent, and then did you move it to another account with available funding? So we really need to watch that. The best way to avoid that is just to continuously watch accounts, especially as they're getting close to being spent out or close to ending, to make sure that that's not occurring. And then also, we can't charge expenses to one grant simply because they're unallowable on another grant. And then also to park expenses, which will be transferred somewhere else. So this really needs to be watched. We're really watching for this, because if you knowingly charge an account and we're billing and we're actively handling it and reviewing it, all to know that it's going to be moved, those are audit findings. As soon as an auditor would see that, that is something that's unallowable, because it's knowingly charging expenses that don't belong on the project. And then also, essentially spending out an award is unallowable also. So we can't just charge expenses because there was funding available, so we're going to use up the funding dollars that are sitting there. So those are also things that are watched for and monitored, especially at the end if there's a huge influx of expenses. Most agencies receiving invoices from us, or even if we're just drawing it from the bank account for NIH or NSF, they can see the increase and may question it and have. So for a timing of a cost transfer, this is important to note. We wanted to note, we want transfers and corrections to be processed as soon as possible, but do keep in mind that if there's a financial report due or we have a submission date that's sooner than the average time frame, then that's obviously going to push up any time that we have to correct expenses. So just watch those awards closely. Also, our office is working as diligently as possible for awards that have a carry forward request dependent on us submitting a financial report. So, if you have your PI wants to quickly turn around and submit their carry forward request, then that means we need to make sure that the ending budget cycle is closed out and reviewed. Any kind of cost transfers that would remove costs or need to add costs that then would impact a potential revision of the report will then continue to prolong the carry forward request. So those are all things to be cognizant of. And then also a final invoice due date. Often state agencies or specific agencies might require 30 days or 60 days. So those expenses need to be finalized as quickly as possible. And then just our note that I think everybody's familiar with, if you're removing expenses, we always have to provide the credit and the refund for any cost transfers that are removing expenditures off the award. So there's no time frame for that. If that is discovered, then we do have to act and handle appropriately. So our next update is project team. Is it related to project teams? So within PeopleSoft, there's a project team associated with each and every project that gets set up. This past year, our annual auditors reviewed workflow. What they're looking for is to make sure that PIs are included in the expense review and approval. So all workflow items must go through the PI. If this presents issues, please work with me. We've been doing a lot of work with the PeopleSoft security team on revamping the process, the approval process, and I believe at some point they'll be updating their form as well. But also through this process, as we've been working together, we've noted that some departments have been requesting PI changes through the PeopleSoft security email. It is important that that goes through your SAM administrator in the SAM office, as PI changes do require sponsor approval, and they will ensure that approval and then send that over to us. So PI change requests routed through the PeopleSoft security email will be rerouted through the SAM office, and likely take a little bit more time if that requires sponsor approval. Another just update, there are our automated emails that go out about project closeout. If you want to be added to those emails, or if those are not going to the correct individual, you can request those changes through myself. We do have the ability to add more than one business manager, so they would be able, if you have a double layer of individuals reviewing awards, we can accommodate that. Your project team, if you want to quickly see who's on it, is also listed in Finance Intranet, and then this is also where we pull for the effort reporting workflow. So it's important for this to go to the correct individual for the departments involved.
And just a quick update on effort reporting. As you guys know, the July through December 2020 effort reports were due at the beginning of March. Currently, as of this morning, we have just over 170 reports outstanding. So be sure that you're reviewing any outstanding reports for your department or for your college, and mainly looking to see, are there any currently in error? And if they are in error, send an email to the GFM eCert mailbox, letting us know who needs to be inserted. Most likely, if an employee had a supervisor that's left the university or retired, they will go into error at that point because that supervisor is no longer present. So we will need to know who needs to be inserted in their place. So if you could send the e-form number along with the updated supervisor, that would be great, and help us get those last few pushed through. And again, just a reminder, please don't wait to review payroll. until effort reports are released. Make sure you're reviewing them throughout the entire life of the award, and not just when the employee's effort reports are released. And we have plenty of reporting tools out there for you to use. HCM distribution, grant dashboard, all of those are great resources, and we have plenty of training aids and webinars out there, because recertification really should be infrequent. And we just kind of wanted to take a minute to foot stomp that.
Thank you, Tiffany. One of the biggest things that we see happen through the effort reporting process and the delay if payroll's not being reviewed is that we need to reopen accounts to remove payroll that is valid on an account. I just wanted to bring to everybody's attention that often when we're reopening an account and we're doing that at such a delay because we're waiting for effort reporting, as soon as we're reopening an account to process that credit, it'll often result in a refund to the sponsor. We're met with a lot of questions from sponsors. You know, why is this being refunded? What's happening? So they're often seeing exactly what we did, the cost transfer, the delay, and it being reviewed or being caught. And then, you know, the other concern, just in terms of the award itself, is that, you know, if a grant ends in January and we're removing July, August, September payroll because it shouldn't have been on that project, the faculty member then didn't have access to spend that on what might have been otherwise valid expenses. So it really is a better process to be reviewing that more often, because if it's already ended and we're looking at it 2 or 3 months after the fact, those dollars are no longer available to be used for other valid expenses, which is not really what we want to have happen if we do have the dollars and they could have been used for other allowable expenses. So, and then I wanted to bring up to everybody, just because I don't know if everybody really realizes the volume that we have coming, but I did look at where we were with account setup and closeout for last year, and then projected what we'll have this year. This June, we will have over 200 accounts that will close. As we are beginning to close those 200 accounts, July will have another 100. August has a sizable amount, but by the time we're in August, the post-award accountants will be closing out upwards of 300 accounts, along with you guys at the departments. On the other side of that, while we're closing all of those and trying to get final invoices out the door and expenses finalized, we will have over 175 that will get set up to begin in July. From the time period June and August, we typically set up 300 new awards. So this is a big time period for all of us, because we have about 600 awards in flux between closing out awards and getting final invoices and final reporting done, to also getting them set up correctly, getting payroll to them, and getting charges started on new awards and sending out first invoices. So with that said, we tried to set up a good timeline of, you know, it's good to start looking at whether you would need a risk account or not, to make sure that we can have everything set up and in place so that you can complete account change forms, and we can try and make this transition as seamless as possible. So ideally, you'd be looking now at your awards. 90-day emails will be going out, if you haven't already been reviewed those, for awards that end June 30th. So paying attention to those coming through, and then also formally requesting the risk account or working with those who need to approve that by May 15th really kind of sets up the timeline to be able to have everything completed by that 7/1 start date. I just want to point out also that, you know, with the increased volume, we try to stick to a first in, first out process, because it's difficult when we have so many coming in at the same time for requests for new accounts. At some point, they all become priority because we need to get as many as we can set up by July 1. And then our process for risk account requests. Anita?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm sure most of you are familiar with our risk account request process. It's been the same for a while now. I just want to touch base. I figured with some of the changes that are upcoming, I just wanted to make sure everybody had the opportunity to feel comfortable about asking for risk accounts and understanding the process and knowing how to submit those requests. So, as you're starting this early look at your accounts and working with your faculty to determine if a risk account might be necessary, we want to make that process as smooth as possible. So the risk account process itself is fairly straightforward. We accept those requests via an actual memo. Some departments and some colleges have their own internal processes that require a formal memo document. We can also accept an email as long as it contains all of the necessary information. So we're just looking for some basic information, identifying the title of the project and the sponsor, the minimum amount of dollars by a detailed budget. We do have to have a detailed budget that you're looking to request for your risk account setup. We encourage you to work with your faculty and to kind of identify what type of budget and expenses you anticipate to have for that next, 90-day period. You are able to ask for up to that 90-day risk account setup. If you don't think you need 90 days, you're always welcome to ask for less. We encourage 90 days because, as you know, sponsors, especially if we're waiting for sponsors to submit documents or getting any agreements processed, that does take time. So we encourage to ask for the full 90 days, but of course, you're welcome to ask for anything up to the 90 days that you feel is appropriate for your situation. And then we're just asking for the justification and a summary. And normally it's something like, hey, we're still waiting for the sponsor to issue the formal agreement, or maybe we're still in the middle of negotiations. And then the last part that is necessary, of course, is just your chair and dean's approval of your risk account request. And then once you have that information, it can be simply emailed to your SAM administrator. And then that way they can get busy processing that request, and then also follow up with the sponsor and, take care of any next steps that might be necessary for that.
Okay, thank you, Nita.
You're welcome.
All right, so kind of with the details of our timeline, we also just want to remind everybody that the system setup takes quite a while. So if we do end up in a rush situation with the system interfaces between both USERRA and PeopleSoft needing to set up the fund, payroll combo codes, getting all of that through often takes a nightly batch. It's difficult for any of those to be ran in the middle of the day because a lot of them require users to be out of the system. So it's difficult to accommodate anything less than that. So really you need to have or account for 5 days in absolute perfect world where everything is going as planned for an award to even get through the system. Obviously if we end up with 30 new accounts coming over at the same time, 5 days is not going to be enough. Any kind of review time period or any coordination or questions that, GFM and SAM might review and talk through are not included in that. So just be aware that, even separate from year end, setup is not something that's easy for us to rush through just in relation to the system as well. And then I also wanted to bring up reappointments. I know we don't have, I don't think the vast majority of grant-funded individuals will need reappointed. But one of the things that we wanted to remind everybody is that if you do have individuals that will fall off payroll, we don't want anybody to miss a paycheck. So the biggest thing is to start thinking about that. If you do have reappointments, we highly encourage you to start your risk account discussions now so that you can ensure you have your 7-1 account set up. You'll need to work on the reappointment through HR. The reappointment is effective at the date that you put through the form. So you may need to process your reappointment using your old fund or your current funding through June. And while you're doing the reappointment, you should also be doing your risk account request so that once the reappointment is approved, you can then turn around and do your account change form for everybody on the account for 7-1. So this will really prevent the concern that anyone's going to miss a paycheck or a 7/15 paycheck. And that's obviously something that we want to avoid at all costs. So if you have these, you have questions, reach out to the Payroll GFM email box. We can try and help as much as possible. If not, we can help find the proper individual in HR and payroll that will be able to give you the resources necessary or answer your questions related to reappointing the individuals on your awards. The other note we want to make about risk accounts, and one of the biggest reasons GFM wants to ensure that risk accounts are set up in time, is because we do have so many awards ending on June 30. We really don't want to be redirecting a whole bunch of 715 payroll. So if you have your risk account set up, you can get your account changes in. It really does cut down on the work from the department level and also the central level, because anything that gets redirected then have to have a retro request to get to the proper award. Now, I will state one of the questions we still get often, it's based off of earnings dates. So anyone paid on a lag for 715 will be allowed and will go through. It's only people who are paid current that are really impacted for the July 15th payroll. So as we get into July, one of the biggest reminders to have large state agency awards. While we as a university negotiate as much as possible, both I know the SAM office does, and then also the GFM controller's office, to get as much time as possible. We do have certain agencies that have allowed for us to submit on July 5th a not final invoice, and they will reserve time for us to submit an invoice as soon as 715 payroll posts for any employees paid on a lag. Some other state agencies, South Carolina Department of Education, they do not give past this July 5th deadline. So you'll need to plan accordingly, watch your expenses, watch when you're ordering expenses, or if you have travel towards the end of June, make sure that all of that's turned in as quickly as possible so we can make sure to get it on that invoice and be reimbursed for those expenses. So, these ones that do have the deadline past July 5th, if you have lag employees, email myself or Lindsay. We can work through with you. We've had some success emailing and working directly with sponsors through collections. We've, forged some good relationships with some of the financial directors at the state agencies where, we may be able to gain more time. If not, we can talk through that. But again, account for that deadline with spending, because even if we can get them to negotiate past July for the July 15th payroll, we often don't get 30 days or beyond that. So any of your non-payroll expenses will need to be finalized as quickly as possible. Most other agencies, other universities, if we have a 6/30 end date, we'll give 30 to 60 days for final invoices. So as soon as June closes, work to ensure that all your costs are accounted by the end of July. This will give us time to review, gather whatever applicable backup we need, work with you for that confirmation, and then also get our finals out to sponsors. And please just remember our volume. We're going to be working through those as fast as possible. So we will rely on you guys to let us know when something's final. If you know that it's final and everything's good before July, reach out, let us know, and we'll try and get those out as fast as possible to keep those moving. If you get in a situation where you're not going to have a charge posted within the 30 days, but we have a quick turnaround for invoicing, just work with your post-award accountant. We automatically will work with Tiffany and Faye in the compliance group regarding subs, but we also rely on you to be following up with your sub and make sure that they're getting you their final invoice or what their time frame is so that we can include that on our invoice. If you have internal charges, the GFM office is in a lot of the workflows for that before those feeds get posted. So we do have some contacts. We can help reach out or provide assistance or, look into anything that might be causing delays. So you can, let us know, and we'll do our best to also help make sure those charges are on your awards. Through Closeout, we're, try to give as many resources as possible. So we do have the 90 and 30-day emails. If you know an award's going to need extended, I think right now we've seen a lot where awards that started last year were very delayed because of COVID. and just, general delays in getting items or being able to perform work. So we see a lot of no cost extensions right now because of that. So just work with Sam as much as possible, as early as possible, to get those extensions processed, or no cost extension requests out to your sponsors. We also send out the 15-day email after the end date, so that you know that this is an award that we're considering in closeout, and that your post-award accountant will be looking at final invoicing and getting that done. We did compile checklists for each of those timeframes. They're on our website. This is to help you guys, and we tried to think of everything that could pop out to review and make sure that everything's covered. And then we also have the combo code end dates we talked about a little bit earlier that will help make sure that out-of-period payroll is not posted to the award. This will definitely help when we're trying to do final invoices and get the invoices out, especially when we're talking about the state agencies. One note that I do want to make is that for incrementally funded awards, so sponsors like NIH, where they'll give you a budget period, but then you'll have maybe a non-competing 5 years. So your project period might be 5 years, but when they incrementally fund, it means that we only have access to the dollars for that budget period. So GFM is not allowed to draw down or request any dollars related to subsequent periods without that notice of award in the system. So review those also. Please do not disregard those 90 and 30-day award ending emails, because if there's a delay with NIH with the new year of funding, we may need to put it on risk just to allow the payroll to continue to post or other costs, because at that point we're no longer able to request the dollars and continue drawing.
And so just a few notes about subawards and your sub-recipients. As you know, Sam coordinates with us in the controller's office to set up the purchase orders for any subaward. So those run through PeopleSoft, and we work very closely with purchasing on those. So if you ever have questions, please feel free to reach out to us. And just a reminder of the reimbursement steps. The subrecipient should be submitting those invoices to the sub invoice mailbox, and that's located right here. And then we coordinate PI approval on those. And then once we get approval, we'll submit those to accounts payable for payment. So please just remember to include those. We still have a couple of instances where invoices aren't making it to us until the very last minute, after there's been after it's already escalated. So please make sure that the invoices are getting to the right place so that we can ensure they're being paid. I do want to point out also that they must meet requirements as outlined in their terms and agreements, or terms and conditions of their agreement. And if they don't, they will be returned. So generally the invoice must contain their subaward or the PO number, the period of performance. So we got to know what period that they're billing us for, the current and cumulative expenses, and then the certification statement along with the signature. And if you're not familiar, these are the sections that specifically state that those are the requirements. So bullet number 2 is where they highlight all of those requirements. And then the subaward number can be found there along with the PO number. And I also want to highlight number 3, where it will tell you how many days they have to submit their final. Sometimes, generally it's 60 days, but oftentimes, depending on what our final due date is, that time period may be shortened. And, also keep that in mind when you're working with Sam. If you know that we only have 60 days to get our final done, you need to make sure that you're not issuing subs 60 days to do their final. So make sure that you shorten whatever their due date is accordingly, so that we can have ample time to get what we need done completed.
All right, and then just as we're reviewing our subaward invoices, and we're trying to continue with our subaward monitoring and make sure that we're in compliance with uniform guidance. Often those that we are invoicing are doing the exact same thing with us. So we just wanted everybody to know that if we do end up in a situation where an invoice is either questioned, it's delayed, or rejected for revisions. The biggest things that are popping out is not having cost share in ratio, so watching your cost share commitments and the requirements of your award. If you have an award that's spent out, but then you've not booked any cost share, sponsors likely to hold the final payment and start questioning where the cost share expenses are so that they can pay us in full. Another thing that happens is if we're spending out a category, if the categories that are on our invoice are not how we're spending, they'll often question that. Sometimes it's just an explanation. Maybe we charge something in a different account code than they were expecting. But if you don't have any payroll in your budget at all, and then all of a sudden payroll's being charged, those are things where sometimes they'll come back and ask more detailed questions. That happens. We often come to the business manager and try to work on that as much as possible. But just watching that before you're charging or working with the SAM office to rebudget is a good idea. Then also when there's delayed spending, or what I'm going to kind of call lump sum spending. So if you've not charged the award for months and months, and then all of a sudden you're starting to charge a whole bunch of expenses, a lot of times the agencies will reach out and ask, what is this? It's not normal. What's going on? Or if there's lump sum spending where we have a whole bunch of expenses that post at once, sometimes that gets questioned also, and we have to go into detail about the expenses. So just making sure that if that does happen, that we have a reason and it's reasonable. Usually we can get it resolved, but sometimes also it catches that maybe something was miskeyed or something was charged incorrectly. And then also missing progress reports. So we'll reach out to you if we end up in that situation also. If the sponsor ties the progress report requirement to the invoicing, they'll often hold invoices as a way to ensure that they get the progress reports. So as we finish up here a little bit, some of our helpful tips for summer pay. Please check as much as possible the combo codes on your summer forms. Those combo codes are where the summer pay will post. There is the query listed on the screen, and the summer forms need to be submitted based off of the schedule provided by HR. So make sure that you're working through all of those and getting those in on time so that summer pay can post appropriately.
Yes, this is Lindsay. I just wanted to let you know that summer is an extremely busy time for HR and payroll. We get about 2,500 summer comp forms to put through, and as you know, right now they're still all manual. Hopefully, we can get those, in a EPAF format for next summer, but they still all have to be manually put in by HR and payroll right now. So we do list we have a field for both the combo code and then the related chart fields, but in payroll, all they have available to them is to put in the combo code. So it's very important that the combo code that you enter matches the chart fields that you list below that. We are going to try and put in a double check this year where payroll is verifying that the combo code matches the chart fields that you listed below. But that is 2,500 forms to check and in a very small amount of time. So if you can help us out by making sure that those match and are correct, then that's extremely helpful. I do want to also mention that it's important to keep an eye on HCM distribution. Those forms that you submitted, make sure that they're showing up in the place that you expect. Each payroll, if you're not seeing it come through, please do not resubmit the forms. Reach out to HR payroll and see that they make sure that they receive the form before you resubmit it, because we don't want to end up in a situation where an overpayment results because the form gets submitted twice. And unless you guys have any questions, I think that's where we're at on summer pay. Hopefully we can get that automated next year. We just ran out of time because we were busy implementing the contract pay module, which took the annualization part out for you guys. Hopefully that, keep making steps towards improvement with summer comp forms, but they are still manual for this year.
And as Lindsay mentioned, there is, you can email the payroll mailbox if you have questions about whether or not a particular summer pay has been processed, if a form has been processed. Because I know sometimes you guys can't just pull an employee's USCID to see where a form may have hit. Maybe you only have access to that particular project. But we have central resources where we can see exactly if summer pay was processed, and we can look that up very easily and prevent overpayment situations, and then initiate the corrections. But again, if you submit a form, if you know summer pay is supposed to hit a particular project and you don't see it there, we can't wait until an effort report comes out to catch it. We need to be reviewing projects monthly, regularly. As we mentioned before in previous web, uniform guidance expects us to catch those things timely. So whether or not it was a keying error or what have you, you got to help us help you.
Okay. So a few other helpful tips with payroll. Aside from summer, we'll always approve removal of expenses if they are incorrect or the effort didn't occur on that project, regardless of the time frame. Also, please pay attention to the pay group for the employee. That is how you determine whether they're paid on a lag or current. So we don't want to be removing in-period payroll if they're paid on a lag, so just want to be careful about that. If in the event that your employee is rerouted, so out of period payroll doesn't post, please be mindful that an account change form needs to be submitted. Sydney works really hard to get all of those reminders out in enough time, so please pay attention to those. Let us know if you have risk accounts pending or no cost extension pending. We'll work with you as much as possible on those. Also, retros are usually processed the day after we receive them. So if you don't see them processed within a week or two, please follow up with the retro mailbox. Again, don't resubmit the form to create a duplicate, but there might be another issue or technical issue that we need to look into. Another couple helpful hints here as we continue on is that the transfer account codes are not allowed in our business unit. We've been doing a quarterly review now of the transfer account codes. So those are 86 and 81 account codes that are moving funds. Because those are not directly related to a specific expense, those would be direct audit findings. Oftentimes we see that the transfer is used when there is a direct expense that just needed to be allocated. So just make sure you're processing the expense the correct way. So usually it's not that it's an unallowable expense, it's just we have to process it correctly. With that said, journal entries should be limited through the department because as we create all of the processes to be able to fix expenses at the point of entry into the general ledger, those are fewer and far between. So just be mindful. Also, payroll has to be done on a retro JE request. It cannot be done via a journal entry, or an account change form needs to be completed also. We can't do a transfer to fund, faculty, or otherwise payroll. Tuition has to be moved using the tuition forms so that it runs through Banner and is corrected through the student account, because when you start to do those journal entries on the general ledger, the auditors will ask, where is it posted in Banner? And they'll compare Banner to the general ledger. So that's important. Also, lease payments, those run through a lease module. So if you have lease payments and you have questions about them, then you can reach out to myself or Lindsay and we can get you to the right person or the right individuals, and that team can help do the journal vouchers and do the corrections. Again, it's keeping the lease module in sync with the on finance intranet. So kind of like I've hinted, those subsystems have to reconcile to the ledger just as part of the larger university audit, not necessarily just related to grants. But we try to do our part when we see the cost transfers to make sure that we're following everything and setting up the ledger side for success also. A few other things to remember, third-party cost share. If you have third-party cost share included in your award, it is something that's coming from an agency outside of our ledger. It's not expenses incurred by USC. Due to this, we have to do a specific entry. Your post-award accountant can do that. If you do have third-party cost share, the backup I would say needs to be similar, just as the subrecipient team is enforcing. So we need something that kind of looks and feels like an invoice that says these are the costs that they have provided for us, the time period of the costs, an authorized signature from the entity explaining that this is, those are valid costs. They've provided them as per the agreement. The original commitment letters from your proposal will not be sufficient for us to be able to book this in the system. If you have questions about that, you can coordinate with your post-award accountant, and we'll make sure that we get all the proper backup so that you can get that submitted and we can get it booked in the system and reported. All right, Anita is going to share some notes about rebudgeting.
Hello. So for rebudgeting, we submit the majority of our requests through USERA for your rebudgets. The only time really that we wouldn't submit the request using the post-award feature in USERA is if perhaps maybe your project was part of a much larger, like a COBRA or one of the other larger multi-account type of projects. But the majority of rebudget requests that you will have will be processed through USERA. We used to be able to do it through via email with your SAM administrator, and we found that using the post-award action request in USERA is very helpful for making sure we have consistent documentation for our rebudgets for audit purposes, and it's a great way for us ensuring that the rebudget requests are using categories that are allowable and are in USERA, and that we're able to communicate very clearly to the sponsor what type of changes we are asking for. So here on this screen is just a screenshot of USERA. So if you haven't had an opportunity to take a look at this option in USERA, I would encourage you to do so. You can pull up an award on the award summary page. Over to the far right under the tools section where you see that little red arrow, that first option is request a post-award action. So that's exactly where you could go as the business manager or the PI themselves. If you have access to that account in USERA, then you will have access to submit a post-award action request. And if you are doing that action as someone other than the PI, it will require the PI's approval prior to it being submitted to SAM in the workflow of the system. But business managers are able to initiate these requests to help out with the PIs. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about rebudget requests, I just wanted to give some helpful tips. And we've had a lot about rebudgets, and especially with some of the challenges that we've had with invoicing sponsors that Maria talked about earlier, we want to make sure that the sponsor accepts our invoices very smoothly. And so we always want to make sure that the way we set up your budget in USERA is a reflection of how the PI and the individuals expect expenses to be, as well as what the sponsor has approved and anticipates to see those expenses come back to them. So when you're doing a rebudget request, there's a couple things that you're going to need to submit in that USERA process. We're just going to want an actual detailed budget. The post-award action request module in USERA is very handy. It helps make sure your budget balance is down to zero. So that's very nice. So that way we all know IDC and everything is accurately reflected. And then along with those budget changes, we do require a rebudget justification. In the past, we didn't always have sufficient documentation when it came back, months or years later, looking at a rebudget and, having questions about that. We always didn't have the most detailed justification on file to be able to explain some of the requests and changes that we made to the account. So again, being consistent in how we document our rebudgets and also how we're communicating those changes that we're requesting to sponsors when it's required for us to get their permission to make those changes. We do ask that everybody completes a rebudget justification. Now, it doesn't have to be in a specific form. We accept, a Word document as long as it answers the following questions. It doesn't have to be in a specific format. And this document should be uploaded to your request there in USERA as part of this post-award action request that you submit. So we're just going to ask you some of the very basic questions that the sponsor would also consider asking. these changes? Has there been any changes in your scope of work, your deliverables? Has there been any significant effort changes? Has the PI changed, or are we changing effort to a point that might require us to ask for sponsor approval? Any type of what I like to call our hot topic budget categories that are usually an indicator that we might have to ask for sponsors approval prior to making these changes. So categories like tuition or participant support cost or equipment, sometimes subawards, obviously, or contractors and travel. Each sponsors, they have their own unique rules and hot buttons when it comes to budgets. Some are, of course, very flexible with budget changes. Others are not. And so answering these questions help us have a clear understanding of the need for these budget revisions and that justification, and then ensures that we have the documentation that we have on file that is sufficient for audit purposes, as well as we have the information necessary to get any prior approval from the sponsor that may be needed. And then of just number 4 there is just kind of an explanation as to why those other funds are no longer needed. And it's okay. Maybe the project took a different direction, or, individuals on the project changed, or, with COVID, we saw a lot of changes, a lot of rebudgets, because people really had to change the way they were delivering some of their projects. So it's not that rebudgets aren't allowable. They're certainly allowable. And in the majority of our cases, we just want to make sure that we're doing a very good job at being consistent in our documentation and justification of our budget revisions. And of course, requesting prior approval from our sponsors and being able to document that thoroughly when it's required for us to do so. So once you've uploaded that justification document, you push a button that says continue. And if you're not the PI that's initiating that request, it workflows over to the PI for them to review and approve the request as well. And then once that PI has approved the request, it gets routed to your SAM administrator. And at that point, the SAM administrator is able to take a look at the request and evaluate if prior approval from the sponsor is necessary. And if prior approval is not necessary and we have sufficient information and documentation for the rebudget, then we're going to go ahead and just process that request right away. And forward that for those account changes. And if it is something that does require sponsors prior approval, then we'll begin to that initiation, that contact with the sponsor. And then once that sponsor approves our changes, then you'll see that approved in USERRA. So I really find that it to be very helpful. I think it's helped a lot of people with the budget details when it comes to the categories that either have IDC or doesn't, and as well as it really makes the consistency for our justification for those changes in the file. So we've enjoyed this new process, and hopefully you guys have enjoyed it as well. And if you have any questions about your rebudget, or maybe if you're not sure if your rebudget should go through USERRA, anytime, always reach out to your SAM administrator and they can help you navigate what the best step is.
All right, thank you, Nita. Okay. One of our other helpful tips here is related to reporting. So just our normal reminder that all reporting that contains financial information needs to run through GFM. We're the authorized financial official for the business unit, USCSP. The biggest thing that we'll see is that protects us from potential missed expenses or issues with payment. And then also, if there's non-financial reports that require financial data, it's still a good idea to loop us in and get that information from us, because if we have financial reporting or formal reporting to that sponsor as well, it makes sure that the same information is getting disclosed overall to the sponsor. And then we also wanted to point out some audit impact. Right now, the university is getting ready to start our annual audit over again. Part of that annual audit is to do what's considered the preliminary CFA, the Schedule of Expenditures for Federal Awards. That goes to financial statements. Some of the components for the CFA include reporting our sub-recipients. This is what the population, or this is the population that's used by our annual audit to pull and review whether we are completing substantial subrecipient monitoring, whether we'll have an audit finding or not. So with that said, the 2 account codes that are owned by the subrecipient process are 52076 and 52084. These are not allowed to be used outside of the subrecipient process. So Faye and Tiffany are the only two that are allowed to set up requisitions and purchase orders using these codes. If you process something against these codes, it not only messes up the subrecipient process in general, but if that gets pulled by our auditor and it circumvented the entire process of subrecipient monitoring and or having a subrecipient agreement, that will be a direct audit finding. So it's just very important to keep in mind if you have contractual services to use the contractual services account code. And if you have a subrecipient that needed to be paid and might not have an agreement, reach out to the SAM office and check in on it, or you can reach out to the sub-invoice email box. They may have a status also. But please do not set up requisitions to these codes, as those do have a very negative impacts on the audit. The other thing I want to mention here also is that reopens are easily visible for awards that have ended and have extra expenses. And you know, those are our auditors. They're going to see it. They're going to ask questions. So just be careful about that. And then the other note that I'm not sure everybody's aware of is the purpose codes that get put into USERA flow over to PeopleSoft, and we rely on these heavily when we're doing the major programs and we have to categorize all of our awards. With uniform guidance, NIH and NSF both came out with guidance that those have to go under our research and development cluster. So be sure to mark those, or make sure your faculty are marking those, either the basic, applied, or developmental research, or there's also a research training option. So if they're doing training, NIH and NSF still stand by, it's all still in the spirit of research, so those have to be in that category. And if we end up with an NSF or an NIH award in the other cluster or somewhere else, again, that's another audit finding just on the financial statement side. So just a couple quick notes so you guys know, you know, what we're seeing and what's helpful for that. So to summarize, you know, pay attention to your 90 and 30-day notifications. Make sure you have your risk accounts. Risk accounts will also help avoid, you know, trying to park charges somewhere else and then having unnecessary cost transfers, even if that's on A or E funds. Make sure you're reviewing your payroll regularly. Allocate your purchase card expenses appropriately. Make sure P cards don't default to grant projects. Sometimes that's a challenge with out-of-period costs continuing to post. Watch your budgets, and then also, as much as you can, try and charge your grant and your cost share as it's incurred and within ratio so that sponsors can continue to pay. So that's it for our content. Our website, you can go to Office of the Controller's website, and then under Grants and Funds Management, this webinar. All our webinars, all the effort reporting webinars and resources, the subrecipient information, all of those kinds of webinars and resources are all there for you to be able to see and use. If you still have additional questions, like I said, you can reach out to myself, to Lindsay, your post-award accountant, any topics that relate to the CM office, reach out to them as well. Or, you know, if it's effort reporting, Tiffany, and Faye for subs. So we will open it up for questions.
All right, so we have a question regarding the cost transfer. What if another cost was inaccurately put on the wrong fund that caused the PI to overrun? How would we address that?
I think here timing is the biggest factor. If the award overspends and you immediately catch the error, then I think that we can review that, and those are sometimes ones that we'll approve and let process. I think the biggest thing is when we're overspent by $20,000 and then all of the expenses start to shift to a different project. So, you know, I think it definitely depends on the situation. There are situations where that does happen, and we'll consider that and allow, you know, as needed.
Tiffany, this one's for you. What if I am the current supervisor, but not the supervisor for the effort report?
That's a great question. So in those instances, as the current supervisor, please still email the GFM eCert mailbox, the e-form number, so we can take a look at that together. Because if the current supervisor is no longer there, we may still need, depending on, you know, if there's funding sources that need approved, we may still need to insert someone. Sometimes it's a chair, department chair that gets inserted to approve those other funding sources. So it just depends on the situation in the e-form. But if you can email that eCert email box, the e-form number, we can take a look at it together.
Okay. Next question is, how do we handle retro payroll JEs when payroll makes an error and we reach out to them to correct their error, but too much time elapses and the department has to actually submit a retro JE, causing it to be late to be processed?
I think we touched on that a little bit earlier with the summer comp, but again, making sure that we're double checking the combo code and the accounts chart field string before it's submitted, and not resubmitting forms without double checking with payroll and HR. And then also monitoring the HCM distribution, each payroll based on the forms that you submitted, making sure that those come through properly. And if you come across an issue and you're not getting resolution timely, of course, reach out to Wanda Martin in payroll and copy me, and we'll get things moving.
Okay, thank you. The next is not really a question, more of a statement and a request, I think. They're asking, can the business manager really needs to be in the approval process for risk accounts, not just the PI?
Thank you. I think that's a good statement. And in most cases, the business manager, of course, is welcome to participate, facilitate, or initiate that process. We see, depending on, again, the department that you're in or the college that you are working out of, everybody kind of handles things a little differently as far as the business manager's role. But it is very common for us to see the business manager being the one to initiate that request. Since the risk account request itself is not an automated process, it's done via email and the use of a memo in some departments. I think it's great when the business managers are involved. I think that, the business managers have a unique and vital role of really knowing, having a full grasp of the accounts. And I think it's important for you to work with your faculty whenever that makes sense for you and your department. And you're welcome to participate in that process. And like I said, some business managers basically do that whole process besides the actual PI signing it. And you're welcome to do that. So if that's something that maybe you haven't done or your department, they might have a different process in place. So, we don't dictate your departmental processes, but we do encourage and can see how having a business manager involved would be important and helpful. And like I said, we do welcome that interaction. Hopefully that answered any type of statement or question that you might have regarding that.
Thank you, Nita.
You're welcome.
That's the end of our questions. I'm not sure. There's nothing else coming in at the moment.
All right. Well, we just want to thank everybody for coming. I also wanted to mention briefly that this is Marie, that I will be out on family medical leave starting towards the end of this month and or beginning of May. So in my absence, if you need anything to normally work with me on, you may reach out to Lindsay. But be mindful that Lindsay also has all of her normal duties along with covering for anything related to my absence. But she will do and resolve as she can and as quickly as she can.
That's it. No questions, guys. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And as we said, we'll get this PowerPoint presentation and recording it on the website by end of day tomorrow. And thanks for joining us and have a great rest of your day.